Hello, Steve Arts 89. Well, I want to talk about horrible housemates for a minute or 10. I've lived here for about 15 years because I didn't have the best experience with housemates when I was sharing. Now, the first place I lived was not really a problem. I was living in a room above a bar. There was like two stories of rooms above a bar, and I was like the youngest person there, and I was probably the loudest, so I was probably bothering everyone else. So no one there really bothered me. I was there for about 3 years. And then a friend of mine needed a housemate because their friend had moved out, and I'd wanted to live in like a normal house, so I moved in there. Now, the reason why the friend had moved out was because they'd had a fight, and the friend who stayed, I moved in with, was burning photos of the girl that she'd had a fight with, and she caught her bed on fire and almost the house on fire. So that had been repaired, and I moved in after that, and I moved into the other room. Aside from the fact that the house was mildly haunted, we also had some housemates that I had issues with. Now, the first issue was there was 3 bedrooms, and I moved into one, my friend was in the other, and the middle one was filled with 3 guys, 2 gay and 1 straight. Now, one gay guy originally lived there, and he was fairly passive, and a more aggressive guy had basically talked him into letting him move in there and split the rent. And then another friend of theirs that they met from work, I think, had moved in after he broke up with his girlfriend, because he'd moved to Victoria to live with his girlfriend. They broke up and he had nowhere to go, so he moved in. They were all splitting the rent 3 ways. We didn't like that. And I didn't like them there, so I got rid of them, which basically was a matter of me staring them down and them leaving, which is what happened. So the 2 gay guys left and the 1 straight guy stayed. Now, he was okay as a guy. The only issue was, because he was a straight guy, he had not been taught how to take care of himself. So he was a bit messy, and when I would go away for like a week or so, because there were a few times where it was just sort of us, like to visit my family and come back, the place would be full of pots and dishes that were full of water and food that was mouldy, and it was really disgusting. He really didn't know how to take care of himself. It wasn't that he just was expecting someone else to do it, because there was no one else to do it. There was no one else in the house, it was just him. He just didn't seem to be able to take care of himself, and he would just, run out of dishes, and then he'd like start getting takeout. So eventually he moved out, and before I get to the first sort of stranger that moved in, my friend had some issues as well as a housemate. Now, she was one of those sort of, I'll call like a theoretical feminist, where she hadn't lived a lot of life, but she had certainly read about a lot of things. And she would argue about things, and I'd be arguing from a point of view of things I'd actually lived and experienced, and she'd be arguing about the theory of, the feminist theory of that. And she'd lose a lot of arguments, and she wouldn't appreciate it. So we had a couple of fights and just arguments, but she was very spiteful. Like I said, she was burning photos of the friend who had upset her. So my toothbrush disappeared, and I'm like, where is my toothbrush? And she was a bit quiet, and she said, I'll buy you another one. I'm like, what happened to my toothbrush? And she wouldn't tell me. I assume she cleaned the toilet with it or something like that, and the idea was that she would then, leave it out for me to use and I wouldn't know. But she thought better of it and threw it away, but didn't have the time to actually replace it, so she ended up replacing it, and I never found out what she did with it. But yeah, she had some issues. Now, she actually moved out for a while, and another one of my friends moved in. And she was an only child, and she kind of, it was difficult because she kind of expected things to be, like she would expect like to have the lounge room to herself. She had a boyfriend, and there'd be times where he'd be in her room and she'd be in the lounge room. And the lounge room was a social place. If you're in the lounge room, the assumption would be that you wanted to socialise. So you'd go in there and she'd be annoyed that you were bothering her or interrupting her because she was trying to get away from her boyfriend. So little things like that happened. But aside from that, she was a reasonably good housemate. Now, she moved out to live with her boyfriend. And then we ended up with the first housemate, who I shall refer to as Bunny. Now, Bunny was a stereotypically butch lesbian, and I think she was driving a dump truck at first, a garbage truck, and she lost that job for a while, which was a nightmare. But then she got another job, and she was going around women's toilets and emptying the dispensers where women would put their products. And she was an alcoholic, and what she would do is she would basically, a functional alcoholic, she'd work all week, then she'd basically sit down in front of the TV with a beer in her hand and not move for the weekend. And she had a crazy ex-girlfriend that she was stalking and or would be stalking her. So there's a lot of drama there. But also just, we didn't feel comfortable. It was like, she made it like her room. And it was like when you're a kid and your dad sort of was like in the lounge room and you didn't want to be bothered, you just sort of avoided it. She was just sort of like that. And eventually she moved out, thank God. But before that, we had a couple of fights, and there were a few things that she did. The first thing that she did was, after a fight, she used my towel to wipe herself after she went to the bathroom. I discovered this, of course, and I took it out into the courtyard and burnt it, which will be the thumbnail of this video. But also, when she was unemployed, she was sniffing around my room, looking at things, and asking how much things cost, like my Franklin Mint dolls and my Star Trek collectibles and things, because she was obviously thinking of selling them, stealing them and selling them. But fortunately, I had a lock on my door and never left it open while I was there with her. So she moved out, another girl moved in. Now, this girl actually gave us real references. Unfortunately, we didn't check them. Had we called perhaps her sister and so forth, we would have learned that she was a schizophrenic who regularly went off her medication. So she went off her medication, and we could not manage her because she was not a functional person in that time. And also, did I mention that the house was a little bit haunted? And we couldn't really handle the presence that was there as well. So we just had a point where both my friend who'd moved back, because something else that happened with my friend who lived in that apartment. When she was with her dad, she would complain that he was misogynistic and controlling and so forth. When she moved out and was, a free sort of student and that, she would complain about living with him. When she was living with me, apparently she was complaining about me being controlling and having to do everything and ruling the house. And when she moved out for a while, she moved in with another friend, and she would come and visit and complain about him being controlling and ruling the house. So I think the common thread was her, so I think she had the issue. But so she'd moved back after she couldn't handle this controlling guy who, they had a fight and he got drunk and he lined up all the knives from the kitchen sink in a row up the hall pointing to her room. So there was some issues there. So she moved out from him because he was a horrible housemate apparently. And she was a horrible housemate as well. So we got to the last one, and both I and her both had somewhere to move to because her dad had moved to Melbourne to be closer to her because she came from another state. So she was able to move in with him because he had a spare room, which was just so she could visit, but she moved in there. And my friend Mary had I'm trying to not use people's names, but she'd moved in with her boyfriend and he'd moved out because things weren't going so great with them. And we both had a chance to move into somewhere. So we said, okay, let's just move out, get away from this house with the dark energy and the presence and the housemate who did not function, and just leave her there. She can sort herself out. That's her problem. So we moved out and left her in the house alone. And as far as I know, the authorities came and dragged her out, and then the house ended up being empty. Some people, not us of course, went by and smashed some windows just to compensate for some of the things that weren't repaired for the real estate who should have paid for stuff. Well, they had to pay for all the windows. The place was torn down not long after that, and now there's a cafe with a bunch of apartments above it, which is a lot nicer. And they also removed the house next to it, so there's quite a large building now in place of the two houses that used to be there. So those were some of my worst housemate experiences. Probably the other notable mention was I did move in with my friend for a year or so, and she was very much our only child. And when she was with her boyfriend, basically they would fight sometimes and need space. So one would be in her room and the other one would be in the lounge room. And usually the lounge room would be a space where you would socialise, and you assume if someone was in there they wanted to socialise. But she'd get really annoyed because you'd be in her space by being in the common room basically. And it was kind of frustrating because she, like I said, was an only child and very much was used to having things to herself and didn't really like to share and very much needed her own space, which she couldn't really have when she was there with her boyfriend and there weren't enough rooms. So aside from that, she was an okay housemate. But basically, that's my history of housemates. Between toothbrushes, cleaning toilets, and towels being used to wipe themselves with, people burning down rooms. It was. I've lived by myself for 15 years since then, because I can do whatever I want. I don't have to worry about anyone else's issues. It costs me a lot more, but I'm free to do whatever I want, and no dramas, and no stress, and no uncertainty. That was the worst part, because when I was living with my friend, she moved out for a while, and I was looking for another housemate to move in there, and I couldn't find anyone sane, and I just decided to move into a unit by myself. So this is my second apartment by myself, and that's how it's going to stay.